This is Robert Mardlacci of the MindShare Learning Report, Canada's learning and technology e-magazine. And welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech, MindShareTV live podcast edition with Klaudio Muca, who is the research and development architect at Zebra, based in Denmark. They recently released a fascinating interactive mixed media WISE journal. And we were actually part of the video interview a couple of years back. Klaudio, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here.
I hope you and your family are healthy and well.
Yes, thank you. I hope the same to you.
A little bit about Klaudio. He is, as I said, the research and development architect. He has a master's of architecture from Politecnico di Milano, pardon my Italian, in Milano. And you did some fascinating research around learning environments as part of your master's degree, and kudos to you for that. We'll ask you a little bit about that. But let's talk a little bit about Zebra, which you can, I'll pop that into our stream. And I understand that you employ a multidisciplinary international staff of more than 65 architects, constructing architects, urban planners, landscapes, and you are throughout the world. You've done work with Lego, which is a client of ours as well, head office in Denmark, with branch offices in Copenhagen and Abu Dhabi, UAE. And then after years in the making, today we are extremely pleased to be one of the first interviews, I presume, with your new WISE journal.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much, Robert, for this opportunity. You already covered quite a lot about Zebra and the company that is behind this mixed media journal. I just want to show briefly a few projects, going through some of the variety that we work here at Zebra, from master plan to small scale buildings. And these are some of our projects in Canada, where we are kind of like very motivated to work with also local architects. We always like to collaborate with local architects because we believe it brings the best out of us and as architects and as humans. This is a project we recently won for the University of Toronto.
Congratulations.
Thanks. It's one of the new instructional centers of the university. And maybe we can talk a bit more about it, but these are a few images. And another project of ours in Canada is this one called Broadview. It's a mixed use project, quite large. And maybe the interesting thing about Zebra that I would like to mention today is that the company was born to work on a project that had to reimagine 13 schools in Denmark. These schools needed to be reimagined in terms of learning, in terms of how can we shift from the more traditional lecture-based sort of like instruction to more project-based instruction. And this happened 20 years ago. And this was kind of like one of the reasons why the company was born and one of the drivers of the company.
What a massive shift it is to go from the industrial model to these new innovative learning spaces. And, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's really inspiring to see the work that you've done and understanding. And like we embrace here, the future work and learning. You see my background here. There's no front of the classroom. It's totally flexible work and learning space. And this is what's being infused now into the schools, but it doesn't happen at the pace we would like necessarily.
That's right. I think one of the things that inspires us as architects is to start shifting the mindset from thinking about teaching to start thinking about learning. And when we see that all of the abundance of information that we have online today, then we kind of have to think, okay, what is it that really we have to learn at school nowadays? If it's not information anymore, then maybe what we need to learn and what we need to train are those transferable skills, those skills that can be used in more than one context, at work, at school, or with your family.
Fascinating. I saw some of your research that highlighted 16% of the learning is attributed to the environment that you create for students.
Right, to the physical classroom. So this is a research that was conducted by Professor Peter Barrett from Manchester, and they analyzed thousands of classrooms, and they were able to extrapolate, to put a number, because there is very little evidence out there on how much space actually impacts learning. But Professor Barrett was able to actually put a number in it, and it's, as you said, it's 16% of the variation of the learning progress over a year is due to the physical environment of the classroom. So this is just over a year. If you imagine all the years that students spent in schools.
Right.
Incredible.
Now, are we making progress? I mean, you know, I mentioned earlier that it's never quick enough, but are countries' school systems tuning in to the work that you do and others around inspirational learning environments?
I think that's a very good question. And the general feeling is yes. But on the other hand, if you look at some of the recent surveys in Australia and New Zealand, for example, they found out that 75% of teachers still teach in traditional ways. And, and that corresponded in 75% of classrooms that are still in rows and facing the teacher.
What percentage did you say are still in rows?
75%. So it corresponds with the amount of teachers that teach lecture-based.
Now the pandemic was an inspiration for one of the most innovative periods in modern times in education because of necessity. Dr. Steve Jordan, who happens to be a psychology professor, I believe you know him from University of Toronto, Scarborough, talked about the threat of the great snapback, if you will, for teachers to go back to the old way. Who would have imagined 100% of educators embrace tech-infused pedagogy in the last couple of years?
Right, and that's another reason why we tend to think of COVID as an accelerator in a way,
right?
Which makes perfect sense. And I think one of the main opportunities that schools and teachers, I think, have now that we went through this crazy experience of the pandemic, is to maybe embrace the fact that you can easily transfer knowledge online. Maybe you can easily deliver a lecture via video, and students can watch that lecture multiple times. But then why don't we take this as an opportunity to use the moments when we meet, to use the moments when we are in the classroom, in the physical space together, to use that opportunity to discuss and to analyze and to review knowledge instead of just absorbing it by
Absolutely. The notion of challenge-based learning, or I really like this concept that you talk about, is active learning, getting kids outdoors, bringing the classroom outside. We've seen some of that. We had one of our Schools of the Future Challenge winners we visited in Sudbury, Ontario, that had a classroom outdoors. They had furniture outdoors. Smith System, one of our partners in the Schools of the Future Challenge, is creating outdoor furniture for learning as well. Let's talk perhaps about the value of active learning. And you are going out to play soccer later tomorrow morning. I'm playing hockey. It's about embedding it in your lifestyle and your workflow, if you will.
Absolutely. The research on active learning is very fascinating, I think. And one of the main researchers that has kind of like gone deeper into active learning is Professor Freeman. And actually, Professor Freeman was able to, again, put a number in what's the difference between active learning and passive learning. And it turns out that students that are learning actively, students that are engaged into the discussion and into the learning activities, they tend to perform better than students that are taught with traditional ways of instruction. And actually, when students are taught traditionally, they are 1.5 times more likely to fail into their exams. So I think that's a huge difference. And another interesting point about active learning is that actually students, they believe they are not learning more when they are active, because sometimes when you have to engage into a discussion, sometimes when you have to be participant, it's not easy. It's easier to be on your phone and to be distracted. But when you have to engage, that becomes sometimes tough. And therefore, they believed it was better to receive passive, delivery of information.
Interesting. Fascinating. Let's pivot now for a moment, and let's talk about the inspiration around the WISE journal, which it was a while in the making, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it took more or less 3.5 years, perhaps, because we have been working it for almost 5 years, but in between we've had periods where we had to kind of transform this knowledge into a project. That's when we did the competition for the instructional center of the University of Toronto and other projects. So it's more or less.
Yeah. Congratulations, and thank you for the downloadable journal, digital journal. Now, let's talk about the composition of it, because it is leading edge. We publish an e-magazine. It's our 15th anniversary this year. And from the get-go, I started embedding video in interactive podcast. And you've gone beyond that. So talk to me about the inspiration of that.
Yes, I think one thing we realized is that we are in a journey to investigate and to look into the unknown. We don't want to base our design into knowledge that we already have gathered through the years. We, of course, want to use that as a baseline, but we are very much interested in what is going to happen rather than what has happened. We know that 40% of the core skills of employees are going to change in the next 5 years. So how can we cope with this incredible fast-paced society? How can we cope with this incredible transformation that is happening? And for us, that is one of the drivers behind this journal. That is being curious about disciplines that are not necessarily in our own field of expertise. That's why we have interviewed professors of psychology and business leaders and vice presidents of workplace in these very large companies around the world. It's because we are very curious to find out the relationship between architecture, people, and society. We want to create a beautiful architecture. We want to create sustainable architecture. And at the same time, we want to create spaces that are conducive to learning and to work. We have found that the learning system and the work system are sort of like overlapping in many ways. We like to speak about this as work at school and learn at work. You know very well the fact that many of us have to kind of keep up to date with new ways of working and with new sort of like skills that emerge in our sectors. So we
absolutely
are lifelong learning.
And we embrace that here at the MindShare Workspace, where we have co-working and co-learning. Mm-hmm. We have co-op students from high school. We have university interns, and we worked with one particular student who spent a couple of years with us through a ICTC skills development program at the not-for-profit at the federal level, recognizing that there's such a shortage of IT skilled women in tech that we invested and now we hire the student full-time upon graduation. So unless employers start realizing that it's not just a job, that it's a partnership, if you will, right? Where it's a reciprocal arrangement where they're learning, you're working, and you are both winning. And obviously they need to be paid a reasonable wage as well, but that's where you get the retention. Yes. There's a lot of organizations now in Canada struggling because if they're working remotely and there's no culture, there's no learning, what's the value that you're offering beyond a paycheck, right? And that's why there's so much movement happening today in employee retention. And I'm not sure if it's a similar situation where you are in Denmark, but it's happening here across the country in North America.
Yes, I think it's the same situation also here, of course. Employee retention is a big challenge that many businesses are facing. And this is another motivation actually behind the journal. Our motivation is to make clients understand certain qualities that architecture can bring into their organization. We like to speak about well-being per square meter instead of cost per square meter.
Wow, so, that's an interesting notion.
Yes, we are convinced, and we have tried to gather facts and sort of like research studies about this in this journal that shift the emphasis from as I said, cost to well-being, and what does well-being and happiness and like having a nice time at work mean for a company. We know that 90% of the cost of a business are actually employee costs, like the salaries and the benefits.
Right.
Therefore, that's where the well-being per square meter becomes important for us, instead of speaking about cost.
So I'm looking at your introduction, and it's nicely laid out. I love the design thinking around this publication, focus on work, innovation, space, and in education. And you really embrace learning, and you've really been immersed in Canada. And talk to me about the Canadian market and your project at the University of Toronto.
Yeah. So one thing to say about the structure of the publication is that we like to think about it as a curiosity maze. So we hope that while you go through these essays and through these case studies, you can kind of get lost and get inspired by something that you stumble upon. That's why there's not a very strict sort of like way of reading it. You could kind of jump around and get inspired by different things. So we are kind of like provocative in that way, with the way that the publication is structured. But
don't mind me. You keep talking while I'm exploring the publication. Okay,
absolutely.
If you don't mind.
Yeah. Speaking about experience we have in Canada, it has been very positive. It has been very positive since the first stages we have when doing competitions and RFPs. As I said, we are really keen on working with local architects, and the project for the Instructional Center 2 of the University of Toronto was very interesting, because there was some hints towards the fact that the brief of the competition was asking for active learning spaces. There were, let's say, 7 classrooms were meant to be active learning based, and other 14 were sort of like in between being traditional based and collaborative. What we did is that we pushed the brief to such an extent that many of the classrooms that were not meant to be collaborative ended up being actually collaborative and active. And I could share some slides about that project as well, if you want.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to stop sharing. I was enjoying flipping through the digital book, but I'll pop you back in.
Yes, it's just because I think it speaks a lot about what me and you are trying to cover here, which is how to transform the ideas about new ways of learning into space. And this is an example where what we were asked was to design a 500-seat lecture hall that could have looked more or less like this. We saw many negative aspects about certain type of layouts. For example, the distance of the person sitting at the end of the room to the teacher. And as we said about, if we want and if we believe that engagement and participation in the learning process are important, then we thought this layout was not working with us. So what we tried to do is that we proposed to rearrange the classroom in a round instead. So you can see the before and after. This was it was asked, and this is what we did.
Fascinating.
And a lot of things happen once you do this operation. One thing is that the distance of the last row to the teacher becomes much smaller. Therefore, students are almost in the social space of their peers and the teacher, instead of being far away. And then they have a much better view of the screens. And another thing that happens is that you start creating many visual contacts between students that sit across each other. And we know that facing a person increases the chance of you interacting with that person. So if our goal is to stimulate engagement and stimulate discussions, we believe that this layout was much better. And after a lot of meetings, after a lot of discussions with the professors, and there was a huge user involvement process in this project, which we are very happy about.
And what was the response like?
The response was positive, but also there was some challenges from the professors, which was, one of them was that they felt uncomfortable to have their back sort of like unprotected. And there is many explanation to that. And there is a theory.
I get that.
Yeah, exactly. Called the prospect refuge theory, which kind of like makes us understand their point. But what we were able to do is that we were able to accommodate both the layout where the teacher sits at the center or like stands at the center, and another layout, which is a variation of this layout, which is more like a horseshoe layout, where still you have
Right.
1, 2, 3 sides of this layout.
Sure. Brilliant.
Students
Now, is that a revolving stage, or would the professor just simply walk around it?
I think we were into the middle of the sort of like technical aspects about how to do this.
Yeah.
But I think the podium, from what I kind of like was involved, and now I'm not sure what it ended up being, but the podium was supposed to move in the rail, so it could move from the center to the edge of the room.
So next time you come to Toronto, I'll take you to the CN Tower for lunch. That has the revolving 360 restaurant. So in 1 hour it rotates. So I just had that vision, which would be kind of cool. It would keep their attention.
Right.
It would gradually rotate.
Yes, that sounds definitely very engaging.
Yeah. So I should put a patent on that.
Yes.
The Martellacci effect.
Cool. So lastly, the last thing I wanted to show is this other classroom that was supposed to be a collaborative classroom for 200 students. Again, we saw some negative points with this layout, which, for example, the students that sit in this group of tables of 4, it will be kind of hard for them to see the blackboards or the screens. So we pushed the brief there, and we said, why don't we think of another type of booth of group? And we investigated many possibilities, and we ended up with this layout where students are still in groups and they still feel sort of like protected in their own group, but at the same time they're facing the front of the room. And as we showed here, you can easily be all like sitting a bit more close and look at the front, or you can move a bit more around the table and have more like a project work or
more collaborative. Yeah. Brilliant.
So this was another challenge.
So where are you in the construction phase for this particular project right now? I can't wait to visit and tour it.
Yeah, I think we are kind of like well ahead, and we were recently discussing about the type of furniture. So I think the sort of like, the structure is getting there, but now we're thinking of the furniture as well in parallel. So that's how the classroom is supposed to look, hopefully. And another thing that happens here is that the acoustics of the rooms become much better, as you can imagine, from having this sort of protected back.
It looks really inspiring. Some a place that you'd want to go to. I mean, where did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong in all this? Because when you go back to the early beginnings of learning, you were outdoors. It was collaborative. You were gathering. I remember in university we would gather with our professors in lounges, and is it simply because of sheer numbers, that the most logical thing to do was tiered seating, straight row desks, etc.?
I think that's a good question. To be honest, I'm not sure if I can answer that, but I think it's probably because of how much we have been focused to speak about numbers in our society, and speak about efficiency, and not only efficiency, but as I said, cost and how to, and also like the whole like modern movement was probably guilty for some of the lack of sensory stimuli that we can see in some of these spaces that we're trying to propose here.
So I have a question for you around how COVID has impacted the design thinking for the future work and learning environments.
Yes, we have seen quite a few changes, of course, obviously. The main one is fitting into the agenda that we spoke earlier about project-based learning. And as we said, once teachers realized that they could easily deliver a lecture online, we expect many new competition briefs, many new design briefs to be more oriented towards the collaborative aspects of learning, rather than still, have huge lecture halls that are still in rows for 500 students. We hope that's going to change after COVID. And another thing that is interesting to mention, I believe, is how certain classrooms can be double programmed to also act as recording studios. Because what will happen most likely is that some students will still maybe stay home some days for many reasons. Therefore, how can we include them in the classroom activities that are going to probably happen in presence with the rest of the students and the teacher? So this sort of idea of transferring the physical classroom into the digital environment, I think it's
Right.
possible.
So the notion of hybrid learning, is that something that
Exactly.
Universities, college, and school systems should be adapting to? What's your sense?
I think you're right on that, and we can see a comparison with work. What's happening in workplaces is something very similar. The need for hybrid meetings is becoming exponential. I mean, there was the idea of having meeting rooms that were also connected digitally, but now when we see what clients are asking for their workplaces is reducing the size of the meeting rooms because many people are working from home, but making them able to still be part of the meeting room. So the hybrid work, the hybrid meeting, and the hybrid learning, I believe, are going to be there and are going to be a very solid part of buildings.
How talk to me about technology piece in how you see technology being infused. There's VR, there's AR, there's interactive screens that right behind me. How do you integrate all these tools, and how do you prepare for, a future that we don't necessarily know?
Yeah, I think there's two interesting aspects to mention here. One I would like to mention is what we as architects have been doing to deal with technology, or to deal and to embrace technology. Together, I mean, one of the aspects of working here at Zebra, besides working on the journal, for me, it has also been to work in a tech startup that Zebra started 3 years ago, which is called
wow.
Common Sense. Yes. This project is a parallel project of the WISE journal, and the goal, and it has the same goal, which is to find out which type of architectural qualities are conducive to learning and to work. But we do this with technology, and we do this by using sensors. So we place sensors in spaces that can track environmental qualities, for example, daylight. They can track noise, they can track temperature, and they can also track if people are sitting close to that area by using vibration sensors. So then our goal is to use this big data and to correlate this data in order to match which type of environmental qualities are the ones that are more preferred by people, and what are these conditions, and how can we use these conditions as architects to generate better spaces and conducive environments. So this is one aspect I think that's very important regarding technology.
Fascinating. And so what's next for you? So are you still immersed in the startup as well?
Yes, I'm working in both projects at the same time, but I think a very important part now for me, it's going to be to get out there and try to disseminate what we have learned and what we have gathered in the journal, but also by designing, by actually doing and practicing the architecture profession.
So I interviewed recently Mark Prensky, the thought leader who talked about the digital immigrant and digital native, and one of the things he talked about was the fact that students need to gain experiences and build on the skills that they've garnered. He released a new book recently, and it's those skills you garner that will help direct your path to where you want to pursue a post-secondary or higher ed degree and a career. You have a unique journey that you've had being immersed in architecture. And what would you say to students who are, and school counselors who advise students on a regular basis that it's not just lawyer, doctor, accountant, policeman, I thought I was going to be a hockey player. That was my trajectory, and I played at a high level, but against Wayne Gretzky. But I ended up going to university and was first in my family as Italian immigrants, of which that's your background as well. But it's really important to nurture and expose your kids to opportunities to gain skills and knowledge. It's
Right.
not just the teacher. It's not just the teacher's job in this. It's a partnership, if you will.
No, I think it's a beautiful question, and I believe that if we continue to go in this path where students work more project-based and are not just passive absorbing some sort of information, if we believe and go in this journey, I think there will be a higher chance of students realizing their potential, of students realizing maybe the area or the discipline that they are more interested in, and then pursuing that quality that they like, being that if it's a research-based or deep work, or maybe being a complete opposite. Maybe someone will realize that they really enjoy speaking in public and they really enjoy presenting some project to others. I think this necessarily will increase, as I said, the chance of someone like a student or a young adult being able to find their drive or their passions. So I think that education has a big role. I mean also schools and teachers have a big role here as well to guide students.
Brilliant. Talk to me about creativity, imagination in the learning process. And I love the notion of appealing to all senses, because the more you appeal to students' senses, a professor and president of the University of ASU, they had a Smart City Summit, which was quite fascinating. He said, learning is an emotional process. The more connected you can be to that learner and appeal to those senses, the more powerful that impact is going to be.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. As architects, we are obviously curious about senses and how to stimulate senses in a way to generate a positive outcome. And typically, architects are more sort of like focused into the indoor climate and are focused into getting right the temperature and getting right the daylight and getting right fresh air. But what is interesting about the journal and this research project that we are sort of like pursuing is that we look into other parts of sensory stimuli that are usually neglected. For example, we are very interested in how sense can impact our moods, our behaviors, and our well-being. There is very interesting studies about certain smells. For example, the comparison between lavender and rosemary. They have been found to have opposite effects. So people were able to focus more and were more alert when they were in the presence of rosemary smell compared to being exposed to lavender, where they felt more drowsy and sleepy. So this is just one aspect. And there is more to it. For example, colors. Colors can have incredible impact on learning and nature and all the aspects about biophilic design and natural materials and then sounds.
Well, fascinating. It's not surprising that your colors in that screenshot there mimic some of the colors we have here. And it's that's a comment we often get, is that when I come to the MindShare workspace, I feel inspired. And
that's important, right?
We need to, as leaders in work and learning, we need to be mindful of creating those environments, especially in trying to get your team back and welcoming students back. I want to share something with you that you'll find very interesting. Our Schools of the Future Challenge that we're launching our 14th year now is quite interesting. Last year's winners, and I'm going to showcase them here, from Archwood Elementary. These girls in middle school redesigned their school to scale in Minecraft in Louis Riel School Division. And they were, as part of the challenge, they made it LEED certified. They designed it in Minecraft. They had a learning commons. They put in a vegetable garden. They had a First Nations prayer area outdoors, and They also had, a daycare they implemented. The superintendent, Christian Mishlik of Louis Riel School Division, when we shared and announced they won, said, I'm sharing this video with the architects because I want them to infuse some of your ideas within the school renovation. How inspiring would that be for middle school kids?
I think that's awesome, and I think I love this idea of the challenge that you have created with your initiative, because it brings it also raises the bar for the students and the teachers that are going to encounter these winners, and they're saying, okay, if these guys
Right.
did this year, what can we do next year? And it's of course inspiring for everybody.
Absolutely. And now this year we're infusing the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN and asking students and to work with their teachers to solve a real world challenge with tech-based solutions within their school community. So perhaps we'll get you involved in it. Sounds like there might be some synergy there.
It will be wonderful. I think it's, again, a great idea to incorporate the bigger picture into learning, and that makes all activities more relevant and drives motivation in students, for sure.
Klaudio, I'm so grateful of your time today, and we've gone well beyond our time, but fascinating conversation. Congratulations on the launch of the WISE Journal.
Thank you so much.
How could interested folks get a hold of it?
Well, you can either search on Apple Books for it, if you just search the WISE Journal, or you can go at www.wise-journal.com, and you can find it as a PDF as well.
With that, thank you again, Klaudio.
Thank you, Robert.
That was Klaudio Muca from Zebra Architecture. My name is Robert Marglacci of the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning Technology e-magazine. Be sure to check out www.mindshare Learning to get your latest issue and learn more about Zebra. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.